Wanda, you are the founder and principal of Liberty Co. You have a very, very powerful story. I've interviewed you before, and I'm so motivated by all that I've learned from following you online, but also speaking with you personally. So thank you so much for joining me today on The Pulse.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
So I want to read a piece from your Reader's Digest article that you wrote yourself, which is so powerful and so beautiful. So, I mean, if people out there haven't read it, they need to find it and read it. So this is a piece that I took from it and I think really describes your story, and I'll let you tell it from here. You say, my difficulties fitting in, my problems at work, and my divorce all made sense when at 46 I discovered I had autism. Huge. So tell me about, maybe start at the beginning. Tell me about before and some of the obstacles that you face specifically in the workplace, because I know that that's your motivation right now is to encourage diversity in the workplace and inclusivity. But tell me about some of the obstacles you faced and then how that all kind of came to an impasse when you found out at 46 that you actually had autism.
Thanks again for the opportunity. And everything that you say is right. There was a buildup, and I experienced particular challenges in the workplace, but not only the workplace. But that's really when I realized that I need to do something about this, and I really need to take charge, particularly of my mental health. So, yes, for some background, and that is in a nutshell, growing up, I always felt different. But I was different. I came from a big family, the youngest of 10. My parents were older when they had me. And my parents were very well educated and very well traveled. So in comparison to my peers, I was different, especially in a small town in a rather rural region where I grew up. But as I aged and I moved around, I noticed that there were issues with my communication and how I was being received, and with relationships, particularly in the workplace. And a couple things I want our listeners to know: a wide variance in reactions to me, and that I was misconstrued, and that sometimes things were projected on me that I did not intend at all. I knew actually deep down I had really good intentions, and I had so many wonderful people in my life who knew this about me, but I was being misconstrued and misunderstood. And then in summation, my mental health hit a crisis point. The winter of 2017 through spring 2017, I had a complete breakdown at work in May. And our younger son was diagnosed with autism that month. Our older son had been diagnosed prior to that. And coincidentally, I had a pre-scheduled doctor's appointment the day after we learned of our younger son's diagnosis. And I said to my family physician, I would like my own psychological assessment. I think I have it too. And so when I received my diagnosis, and it was a relief, I was able to start to put together in a really meaningful way and in a much clearer way decisions I had made, patterns in my behavior, and it all made sense. And it was much more than I had been misconstrued and things projected on me that I did not intend. It was a difference in my neurology. So I actually have a different brain makeup than, say, you or other people I know, people in my network, friends and family who are neurotypical. So this really, Natasha, it's almost 50 years of a story, but those are some highlights for you.
So to me, I mean, this sounds like a unique story, something that doesn't happen very often, but it's actually the opposite. It's more common than we realize, and mostly in women. Why is that?
Well, autism is still viewed as a male condition, and it's still viewed as a male experience. You were onto something though. Uh, we're hearing more and more about diagnosis later in life, because besides being viewed as a male condition and through the male experience, we think of it through a youth diagnosis, a child or youth diagnosis. So we don't think of it as an adult diagnosis, and we don't think of it as a woman's adult diagnosis. However, you are onto something. This is something that is beginning to emerge, that more women are seeking diagnosis, some, like me, at middle age. And a common denominator at middle age is, unfortunately, the trigger is a mental health crisis, even in some cases, suicidality. And it's a buildup of that being misunderstood and being misconstrued, in some instances for the individual's entire life.
Talk to me about some of the obstacles that you faced in the workplace specifically, and how this sort of inspired you to create Liberty Co. as a result.
I guess I would like our listeners to understand that what marks autism as one form of neurodiversity is differences in social communication and interpersonal relations. Now, there's a wide spectrum, a huge range. We're talking about perhaps 15%, although there's underdiagnosis, so perhaps more than 15% of the population worldwide. So there's a lot of people. So please consider those parameters with what I'm about to share. But my differences definitely did present in terms of interpersonal communication and interpersonal relations. And so some examples would be that I tend to be more direct. Women with autism have been described as hopelessly honest. I would say I fit into that category. So I would communicate differently. And in some ways, my communication, my presentation wasn't the best, but I didn't know how I was coming across. Another piece that I'd like people to understand is that people with autism are known to detest office politics and gossip. And that is definitely true of me. So I love high-level strategy. I love planning. I love creating new ideas. And I think that's coming through with my firm, Liberty Co. But I'm not one to be involved in office gossip or politics. And unfortunately, there's a lot of that in our workplace. So I would say, in a nutshell, I wasn't self-aware. I didn't know myself, and I definitely didn't know my different brain makeup. And because of that, my strengths weren't played to. And not everything falls to the person who's neurodivergent or the person who has autism. Our workplaces have not been inclusive. Our workplaces have not been diverse. Our workplaces have not been equitable, and they've not been accessible. And we have thought about things through a very colonialist, white perspective. And not only does that not play to the strengths and be inclusive to our Indigenous peoples and our Black community members, it's not inclusive to our gay community members or our disabled community members either. So there's a lot more to it than that, but that's my journey, and it's why I'm turning my passion into action to see more inclusive workplaces, and especially workplaces that recognize, celebrate, and hire neurodiverse talent.
You talk about feeling relief of being diagnosed with autism, which someone might read on a page and go, that sounds funny. But can relate to it at the same token when we hear you explain your story of how, you were denying who you were and basically feeling repercussions for something that you had no control over, and that not necessarily was a bad thing, right? I mean, to focus on the positives in each and every one of us is the starting point of creating a more inclusive workplace and a more inclusive environment. Talk to me about Liberty Co., how you came up with the idea, how you came up with the motivation to keep going, especially during a pandemic now where I'm sure you're facing many obstacles. Share with our listeners and our viewers what Liberty Co. is.
Well, there was only one name for my firm when I decided to launch it, and it was Liberty Co. because of the freedom that you just mentioned that I experienced by receiving my diagnosis, and more than my diagnosis, my commitment to living my life as the real Wanda without shame, without stigma, and really wanting to share that with others to create a smoother path for others. So Liberty coexisted in a first iteration, and now the second iteration, and my focus going forward is neurodiverse talent. And I began through advocacy. So when I say Liberty Co had a first iteration, it's not that I wasn't active in autism advocacy. I was, but I didn't see it becoming my work. And then what happened was I became more involved because of the unfortunate situation around neurodiverse employment, that the vast majority of our population is either underemployed or unemployed. And then I realized interest in my advocacy, this grim picture around employment, there's something to be done here. And so it's been about a year now. And so this commitment to neurodiverse talent predates the pandemic. But the pandemic has definitely put a spotlight on inequities in our workplace, including in our workplace, beyond our workplace. And another thing that's really interesting is that so many of the accommodations that our neurodiverse population and our larger disability population have been championing for years and have been turned down because they're viewed as expensive or inconvenience, were put in place overnight when a large part of our workforce had to move home in March. So in answer to your question, all the pandemic has done has strengthened my resolve, strengthened my commitment, and I would say increase the interest and the awareness of the need to have more inclusive workplaces, and that includes disability, and that disability is a dimension of diversity and diverse workplaces.
Tell me about the power of sharing your story and the feedback that you've received personally as a result of speaking on behalf of what you've gone through.
It's incredible. I mean, you don't enter this to receive all kinds of compliments. I'm tearing up, as I talk about this, Natasha. It's been incredible. An 82-year-old woman called me after she read the Broadview story, and she said, "Now I understand myself." And if I hadn't received another phone call, or if that was it, if I hadn't received any emails or any notes or any messages, and that was it, that would have been it. Because you hope to impact one person. You think if I share my story and I positively impact one person, that's great. But it's been incredible, that phone call, the letters to the editor after the Broadview article, the notice from Reader's Digest that they wanted to run it nationally, requests to speak, interviews like this, meeting people like you, having so many people reach out. And it's not just members of the autistic community or members of the neurodiverse population, although of course receiving those reach outs are very special, or very, very special. Black community members, Indigenous peoples, people with other forms of disability, women who've experienced sexism, men who have felt excluded, men with ADHD, reaching out and saying, "I suffer too. I've been discriminated against as well. I've experienced the stereotypes. I've been fired." It's just incredible. I don't think I'll ever be able to express, Natasha, what it's like, to receive that response from your story. I can just say that I started on this journey to make a difference. I want a smoother path for others. I want better outcomes, especially in terms of employment, because the burden to the individual and frankly, the burden to our society is huge. and it doesn't have to be. But it's fantastic. It's what motivates me to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to keep doing it until we see the action and change that we really need.
You know, it's really, it motivates me to hear you say that during the pandemic, you actually see a lot of positives as a result, because that's not often not what we're hearing, right? In media and even in our social media feeds. It's a very dark place. So I will hang on to those words.
The other thing that is really, really, really important, and that is we still do not see disability as a dimension of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, race is incredibly important, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender diversity. Of course, these are all dimensions of diversity and they're really, really important. Disability is a dimension of diversity. And when you look at the numbers, there's 1.3 billion people worldwide with disabilities. 80% of them approximately are invisible. So that's the vast majority. That's people like me. You can't see my disability if you just look at me.
Mm-hmm.
Some are both visible and invisible. We need to make huge progress there, and we need to make huge progress, especially when you look at intersectionality. So no one's one aspect of their identity. I'm more than a person with a disability. I'm a woman with a disability. But when we look at the situation of Black community members with a disability, gay community members with a disability, the picture becomes grimmer and grimmer. And of course, these folks face even more discrimination and stereotypes and biases. So that's my hope for 2021. And in fact, some people are saying that the 2020s is going to be the decade for disability justice.
Talk to me about, do you ever feel that you're carrying a heavy load here? You know, you have so much that you want to achieve, and your goals are amazing. They're so inspiring, and you know, and I can't wait to see where the next 10 years takes Liberty Co. But do you ever feel like this is a lot?
Well, self-care is really important. And is it okay at times to say I need to pause and this is heavy? And of course, my journey of real Wanda and accepting Wanda for who she is and living by my own values and principles, that's for everyone to take, as much or as little as resonates with them. But I say it not only because, number one, it's important, it's me, it's what I'm doing, but I am doing this to be helpful. So yes, is it okay? Being you is okay. And whatever you need to take in terms of a pause or devote more in terms of self-care, then you need to do it. You know, Natasha, it's really interesting. Some people have said to me, oh, you're doing so much. And it's actually less of a burden. So what was a burden was not being accepted for Wanda. Dealing with my challenges around communication and being misconstrued. That was a huge burden. Living my life, how am I going to be misconstrued next? Am I going to have to spend a lot of time explaining and re-explaining about something that I didn't intend to do? I thought I was stupid. You ask about misunderstandings in the workplace. Imagine you think you're stupid, but yet you love high level and you love strategy and you love planning and you're able to engage with people in really interesting discussions, but you think you're stupid. So something that's basic to you is not being understood by a colleague. And you're like, so imagine, and I am really taking ownership here for the damage that I did. So think of all the labor associated with that and take that all away and replace that with being able to live my life accepted and able to share with others to improve workplaces, but to improve lives. So that's me, and that's how I'm living my life, and that's to be helpful to the listeners. But that's me. If other people during the pandemic or because of these big world problems that we have, if they're finding it too much, the heavy load, you have to do what's right for you. And something else I notice is people treat me differently. Now that I'm living my life according to my own values and principles, and I'm clear about my mission, people treat me differently. And I'm sharing that in case that's helpful to other people as well. Don't apologize if you need to take some time or you need to spend more time on self-care. Frankly, if you need to do anything, don't apologize for being you.
I feel like the unique takeaway that I'm gonna take with me from this conversation with you, and it's so powerful, is that part of the pathway towards inclusivity is appreciating who you are and accepting, this is who I am, but that's not a bad thing. Embrace it, because when you talk about feeling, intelligent on a high level in a certain area, but then feeling stupid, I can identify with that. And I think we're all putting on this mask and trying to be someone that we're not. And no one's ever going to create any kind of change being someone that they're not. So that is huge for me right now. So thank you for that. That was so powerful.
You're welcome. And it does start with accepting you. And I never accepted Wanda. So to go right back to your first question and the words that you extracted from that article.
Yeah.
That was about Wanda not knowing who Wanda was, and moreover, Wanda not accepting who Wanda was.
And how are we supposed to accept each other when we can't accept ourselves? So that's your first step right there, right? Have a look inside you and figure out who you are and love that. And then people will start to treat you differently.
And they do.
That's the positive side effect.
That is the positive side of it.
I like it a lot. Is there anything that you wanted to add that we didn't discuss today, Wanda?
I invite people to follow the hashtag Inclusion Revolution. It's about revolutionizing the way we think about disability, especially disability employment. So I encourage people to follow the hashtag, use the hashtag, and I encourage people to learn more about neurodiversity, learn more about autism. There's more memoirs out there now than there's ever been before. I don't just mean about autism or neurodiversity, but people are sharing their stories more.
Yes.
And you've certainly been a conduit of that. But there's more memoirs out there. So I encourage people to read those memoirs. There's actually, beyond memoirs, there are just more books available about neurodiversity. And I encourage people to read and to watch interviews and to listen to the stories of others. And do remember that disability is a dimension of diversity.
And when you mention hashtags, also hashtag Women for Women.
Definitely.
Very powerful.
Hashtag Women for Women. We're celebrating our first birthday and would love to have more followers of our Women for Women collective, women supporting other women.
Because when you start going out there on the social media feeds and sharing stories and pulling women in, I find it is, like you said, one person would make me happy, but when you get, hundreds, suddenly you feel like so much more powerful, right? And less alone.
The reason I started Women for Women is because I've had these experiences throughout my life. I've been really surprised at how women have treated other women. And when I say surprised, I need to add to that disappointed. And I would take it so far to say I've seen women treat other women that I don't feel they would treat a man that way. But I didn't want to be negative. I wanted to put a positive spin on it. So I started Women for Women, but it wasn't a hashtag. And then Nadia Banton here in Waterloo reached out to me and over some conversations really encouraged me to start hashtagging it.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to recognize Nadia, and I want to say that's some of the positive encouragement that other women can give to each other.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is amazing. You're absolutely right. You hope, one person, and you think, okay, if I positively influence one woman's life, that's amazing. But when you start to see other women using it
Mm-hmm.
and really taking it as their own and really rallying behind it, that's incredible. That's an incredible
It
feeling.
really is. It's a fuel to keep going
Yeah.
and to look for the positive that's out there because there is a lot. Thank you so much for your time today, Wanda. Thank you for speaking with me again, and I look forward to our next chance to talk about what you've been working on in 2021.
Thank you so much, Natasha.